So anyway, welcome all of you, especially to our dear speaker today, Saket Mehra, very experienced and dynamic speaker for today, and also all the participants who have joined in, and also to other participants who will join in. Today is the 29th session of Analytics Wednesday. We did not think that it will come so far, but it is, week after week, we are able to get excellent speakers, to share their wisdom with all of us. And this is being streamed live on YouTube. So there are some participants there. And of course, this will go on to the Swama YouTube channel, where it remains there as a, and we find that more than 100, 150, 200 people view those videos over a period of next 1 month. So I think that's great, because we are reaching out to people about analytics. That's our passion at Sama. Our flagship product is Idea. Of course, we deal with LSA, which is a continuous control monitoring product from London. We deal with working papers now for statutory auditors, caseware working papers for statutory auditors. The Smart Exporter, which is the ETL for SAP, which is going very strong in the country. And very soon we are launching a smart suite of products for Smart Exporter, where there'll be 80 or 90 tests on order to pay, procure to pay, order to cash, cycles. There'll be 80 or 90 tests which have been designed worldwide, which at a press of a button, a person can run on their SAP database. So a lot of developments are happening. In Idea tool itself, machine learning has been brought in. Efforts are on to bring some form of artificial intelligence into the tool. There have been a lot of developments in terms of apps within Idea, which can be used by internal auditors, external auditors, forensic auditors. And it has become the de facto tool in the country. So we find that, auditors in the country, it's a number one, we hold a number one position in that area. This session is also being supported by the Government of Canada Trade Commissioner Service. Earlier, we used to hold physical sessions at the High Commission Delhi, and we are talking to them where in Feb 22, we might hold a physical session where we will invite chief internal auditors and others from the government to come and share their experience and have a good networking session at the High Commission, in Canadian High Commission in New Delhi. So I think since it's opened out, I think after COVID, it's a possibility which we are exploring right now. I think with that, let me formally introduce Saket. Saket is a very dear friend, but I need to formally introduce him. He has over 20 years experience, has led several advisory engagements around enterprise risk management, corporate governance, internal audits, forensic reviews, various industries, advise clients on effectively improving their internal control environment through cutting-edge audit techniques around continuous control monitoring using advanced data analytics and data mining. He has also advised clients in India and overseas in complying with regulatory requirements, SOX, COVID, ESEC, etc. And he has developed a deep understanding and expertise in the manufacturing and infrastructure sectors like automobiles, steel manufacturing, heavy engineering, specialty chemicals, building materials, infrastructure, and real estate. He has led several forensic and dispute advisory engagements and advised clients on Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, FCPA, and UK Bribery Act compliance requirements. He currently leads the auto practice for Grant Thornton India and has been instrumental in working with different teams on multiple cross-border transactions in the sector. He interacts closely with industry bodies, ECMA, CM, CII, ASSOCHAM, and advocates policy initiatives with the industry bodies. This is very important because I think as a professional, if you're advocating policy initiatives, you are really at the top of your game. He's the president for IA India New Delhi chapter, and is also a member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India Internal Audit Standards Board Subcommittee on Internal Audit Standards. So I think he's really in Delhi, is really at the top there, and across the country, he's dealing with the automobile sector. So as head of practice for the automotive sector. So over to you, Saket.
Thank you, Deepji sir. Thank you for the kind introduction and a very good evening to everyone. First of all, let me thanks again you, Deepji sir, personally for inviting me on this panel. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you this evening. And let me also compliment all the good work for the profession which Deepji and his team has been doing over the years. I've been knowing Deepji for many years, and whenever I interact with him, whenever I speak to him, there are new things which I learn from him as well as from his team. And what you explained deeply, sir, in terms of the new advancements on idea, etc., which are taking place, I think that's where the profession is headed for. And more than the profession, I think that's what the industry also needs. We need such sophisticated analytical tools, which can solve the problems on hand, both for the industry as well as for the professionals. So commendable task, Deepji sir, to you and your team.
Thank you, Saket. Thanks.
So I think what I'll do is over the next 60 minutes or so, which has been given to me, I would talk about uh, automation. So let me just step back and kind of take you through when Deepji spoke to me a couple of weeks back, and he requested me to come onto this platform. I was slightly nervous. I was humbled. I was excited also. Why? Because though I've done a lot of work on analytics, but my understanding, knowledge, or practical usage is much dated. Let me admit that. Uh, and when he asked me to kind of curate something around automation or analytics in auto industry, I really had to think about it in terms of what could be curated, combining automotive industry and analytics. And let me admit, Deepji, sir, that I took some liberty to curate something around intelligent automation in the automotive industry. So not only confining to analytics or data analytics, I took the liberty to talk more about automotive industry and intelligent automation within the automotive
That's
industry.
wonderful, Saket. That's wonderful.
So I don't know whether it goes with your theme or theme of the series more importantly, but I thought that would be
No,
that would
that's
be more
wonderful,
appropriate
Saket.
to
That's really
talk about.
wonderful. Yeah.
Thank you. So there are a few slides which I will just put onto the screen. Yes, I hope that's visible.
Yes, clear.
Great. Thank you. So as I said, I mean, I'll just try to make it as a very free flow conversation, essentially talking about what intelligent automation is, what is that we have been seeing with our clients adopting, I would say, or moving from digitization to digitalization. And it's so interesting because many of our clients across the industries are attempting to move into this direction, whether it's a client which is a mid-market client or it's a client which is at the top notch in the particular industry. Everyone is aspiring to be moving towards automation. Everyone is aspiring towards creating or defining some kind of a roadmap towards digitization. And hence, I thought to first talk a bit more about intelligent automation. I thought to include something around the industry since the topic is around analytics in the automotive industry. So why not to share a bit about what we are hearing, what we are seeing from an industry standpoint. And this is also so very important because as we all know, data is something which is so crucial for us. How the data within the industry, within the automotive industry can be used more meaningfully, more successfully by different stakeholders. So that's something which I thought to cover in few of the slides. And then talking about few case studies, I won't say that I have series of case studies to present, but maybe one or two case studies, what we are seeing has worked very successfully or can work successfully in the industry, taking to you from the first 2 points. So that's a broader theme which I would like to cover over the next 60 odd minutes. I think what I tried doing was to really create some kind of a correlation between what is digital and what is the automotive industry. I mean, if you look at the bottom layer of this slide, we all have been driving vehicles for many years. We have been driving ICE vehicles for many years. And yes, the industry is moving towards hybrid, electric, or even alternative fuels. And yes, there is a vision to kind of move towards autonomous cars or towards autonomous vehicles in the future. If we look at more from a digital adoption standpoint, where we started, say, 15 years ago, or maybe many years before that as well. That was the era of the digitization which typically took place in terms of somebody taking printouts, scanning the copies. Uh, a lot of documentation used to flow from one computer node or one terminal to the other terminal. And how it has evolved over the years, as we all know, is that we have moved from that digitization era to a digitalization era. We may not be there completely, but yes, as I said, there are attempts which are being made. There are companies who have, to a very larger extent, moved towards that kind of a digitalization, wherein there is a lot of automation, there's a lot of use of different technologies around robotics, process automation, or advanced machine learning techniques which are being used. And this is what a complete or a true digital transformation looks like, you know, which not only enhances our productivity, which also helps us in terms of forecasting better, making the business decisions much more timely, much more accurately, and using the technology for its best purpose. So I think that's a kind of a relation I tried to establish between what we have seen from an industry standpoint, how it has evolved, and from a digital journey, how it has evolved from digitization to digitalization to a complete digital transformation. Well, if you also look at from an auditor standpoint, we all have been auditors, and I'm sure most of us are auditors, or maybe related to the finance function. And we all have seen how analytics has played a very significant role in our professional life, or I would say even in the personal life, for that matter. We all have grown up working in Microsoft Excel or say MS Access, and typically what used to be focused more was on the descriptive analytics, which is more, I would say, really looking at the historical data, drawing some inference from the historical data patterns from those historical data sets, and defining some kind of a KPIs which typically then had to be monitored. Any kind of anomalies had to be reported. Some kind of, I would say, statistical sampling which also had to be applied. That over the years gradually moved from that the so-called descriptive analytics to more like a predictive analytics or a prescriptive analytics going further, which is more in terms of how we can actually use the data to perform a what if scenario. To give you some example, many years ago when I was doing my articleship, or maybe the earlier years of the career, I used to work a lot on Excel because I think that was the most commonly available data extraction and data analysis tool. And something like scenario building up or performing a what if analysis used to excite me a lot. But these days, as we talk about the advanced techniques or tools available through machine learning, through advanced technologies being deployed, that kind of a what ifs analysis can be performed at the click of a button. And it not only helps the auditors, it certainly helps the business in taking effective or much more meaningful decision making. What has also happened over the years is still there is a lot of companies who are still performing the task, who are still using the available applications or the ERPs or even the hardcore accounting packages in a very rudimentary form. And our analysis says that typically almost 40% of the time gets spent in these rudimentary tasks around data entry, data preparation, cleansing the data, performing some kind of a data validation, which is more of a manual activity. Now, can we think of it as to how these activities can be automated? The answer is yes. And we all know that how the companies are using, be it RPAs or be it ML or be it AI, different technologies to really pull out meaningful information from these set of data. So that's the transformation which is expected and which is happening with, I'm sure you would have seen it, and we have been seeing it with most of our clients. So what it means is, I think this is very important that technology cannot replace the think tank. The technology cannot really replace the act, what a human can do. So I think that's the connection which the technology plays a very significant role in terms of how can we think like a human and make the technology work for us for our own benefits? So typically, if we look at in our in a simple scenario, when we define the rules, even for performing certain audits, when we define the rules, maybe these could be micro or micro-based rules. There could be some amount of data automation that we may be talking about. But how do we move from those rules and learn and unlearn in terms of by creating some kind of a repository which can then be used? How can that repository have some kind of a learning capability within itself? How can the pattern analysis can then be performed, and then advancing it further by use of NLPs or advanced techniques to do or to get into predictive or the prescriptive analytics. A very important role which is played in this entire journey, whether we talk about the business actually adopting it or the auditors adopting it, is something around data mining, data warehousing, and use of statistical tools. Data mining, I think Deepji also talked about in terms of what kind of ETL are now configured in the idea as an application or the audit workflow management solution, what he talked about. But what is also very important is how do we create some kind of a data warehouse? And many organizations, as we all know, have created some kind of a data warehouse or a data pool for that matter, which allows us in this sense, allows the users, the relevant users, or even the auditors to pull out the information from a one single data source. What is now also important is what kind of statistical analytics are getting performed in this data on this data warehouse. Once you have the lot of host of information residing with you, how intelligently can the data be analyzed and used for effective decision making? Many a times we have seen our clients also talking about expressing their desire or their aspiration to move towards digitization. Now, think of a company which is, which is a mid-market company, very aspirational, has all the capabilities, be it with respect to the skill sets or the technology or the ERPs that they're using. But more importantly, what needs to be understood is that there are many determinants for any organization to move from point A to point B, or to move from digitization to digitalization, or to have a complete digital roadmap. I think many of the things or many of the attributes that we see on the slide are around the availability of data, the structured data, what kind of unstructured data. And this may vary from industry to industry. Also, it depends upon what is the kind of volumes that we are processing, what is the criticality of these transactions, what is the cost of operations are we talking about, what is the volume fluctuations are we talking about. Let's take an example of say a banking or an insurance industry, where majority of the routine tasks are being performed by the RPAs. I mean, that's a classic example which one can talk about in terms of the use of RPAs effectively in a one particular industry. Similarly, for the other industries as well, it also depends upon the cycle time involved, the volume of fluctuation, the volume fluctuations, the skill sets required to manage that kind of a data. So many a times when the clients speak to us that we want to have some kind of a roadmap defined for us to move from point A to point B, I think these are the most critical factors which need to be considered. And this is also so very important because as internal auditors, we also need to be equipped with respect to what are the determinants for my company, for my client to really move on or to embark onto this journey of digitalization. So I thought just to bring it out because, as I said, practically we have seen and we had many inquiries wherein the clients or the companies have been wanting to embark onto this journey. I think it would be fair to tell the client as to what point of time should they really start looking at moving on to this journey, because it may look something which is very exciting, but it takes a lot of courage, a lot of time, a lot of skill sets, competencies, and capabilities for any company to move from one point to the other point. So when we talk about intelligent automation or automation, which could be around on the shop floor, on the adoption of IoT, Industry 4.2, or even simple adoption of your finance in the finance function, something like a finance function transformation. We all know what are the typical benefits it entails. Certainly, it's a reduced human bandwidth And there are many case studies which one can talk about, whether it makes more sense to create shared services within the finance function, or to outsource completely the finance function, or to create something like a virtual finance function within the organization. It leads to faster and timely decision making, better workload balance, employee satisfaction, better handling of the volume transactions, and it actually makes us future ready. So that's something more in terms of how automation, how moving from digitization to digitalization, and then drawing up something like a digital roadmap for the organizations will typically yield some kind of benefits for the organizations. Now, there are many, I would say, examples which can be shared as to what is the right and what is the not so right way of moving on to this journey. But I think in my experience, in our experience, we have seen any organization who has adopted some kind of a phased manner approach has been much more successful rather than going as a full blown approach towards this kind of a transformation. I think moving on, so that was more in terms of automation, what we have generally seen the companies, different industries adopting their digital life cycle. If I were to talk about from an automotive industry standpoint, this is the entire value chain of the upstream and the downstream of the value of the automotive value chain. Why it's important to understand? Because all these different subsets that we see on the upstream and the downstream are interrelated and are connected to each other. And there is a lot of data flow which happens between one node and the other node. There's a lot of data which gets generated on a day in, day out basis at different levels, at different stages across these two value streams. So let's say if there are, to begin with, on the left-hand side of the slide, what we see, the component manufacturers, typically the tier one and the tier two auto component manufacturers, who typically would manufacture the components, who typically would get into some kind of contracts with the OEMs and would supply those products or those components to the OEMs. So there is a huge distribution chain which is established between the component suppliers and the OEMs. And there is a role for these logistics companies to play between the OEMs and the component suppliers. The OEMs have their own set of ecosystem, right from the stage of not only manufacturing the vehicles, but more importantly, servicing the vehicles, doing some kind of a customer relationship management, doing some kind of a post-sales activities, or even advertisement, or creating some kind of a social media awareness about their products. So I think that's typically largely what we call as the upstream in the automotive ecosystem. If you look at how it flows to the downstream, we have the dealer principals, again, where the technology plays or will play a very significant role, because what is now being looked at, these dealership principals will gradually or should gradually become more as experience centers for the customers to come and take the delivery of the vehicles, but not actually to explore a particular model or a particular variant. There are different studies which talk about how educated the customer today is before making a decision about which model, which color, and which brand to go for. And hence, there is a lot of investment, both for all from the OEMs as well as from the dealer principals on the dealership side. If you look at a related segment, is the vehicle financing, which is both the new vehicle financing as well as the existing or the old vehicle or the used vehicle financing, which is a big business to be at. It's got its own nuances, and that's where a chunk of data which gets generated, not only about the credit history of the customers, but also the patterns in which the customers are actually repaying their vehicle EMI or servicing their loan obligations. There is a huge used car or after car market, which is growing phenomenally in India, which is almost growing at a double-digit CAGR. And this market again has different nodes with respect to what checks and balances do I need to perform before actually buying or selling an old vehicle. How can I actually make the finance available to the users more in a much more quicker and a much more easier manner? But that's a different industry which is also generating a lot of data, a lot of insights which can be used in the used car market. So that's something, and the whole idea and the whole objective to kind of put across this slide was look at the different segments, look at the different nodes where the data is getting generated, and how can this data be more meaningfully utilized for the benefit of the industry is something which I will cover in the subsequent slides. I think staying on to a bit talk about the automotive industry or the Indian automotive industry, and this is also important because um, the industry contributes very significantly to our GDP. Almost more than 7% of the GDP is something what the auto as a sector contributes. And more importantly, if we look at the auto component sector within the auto sector, the auto component sector contributes almost more than 50% to the manufacturing GDP. So that's a substantial number, and that's where the sector is also getting the right amount of attention from the government with respect to the policies, whether it is the states or the different states announcing the electric vehicle adoption policy, or is it something the central government announcing something like a PLI scheme for the automotive sector. There are different regulations, there are different state level incentives which are also available to the industry. So I think the larger point is that how do we bring, and more importantly, how do we bring the MSMEs in the sector, because they are the ones who form a very integral part of the sector. Almost 1/3 of the SMEs are part of the auto component sector in India. So how do we bring these different SMEs, also make them future ready for them to be the partner with the larger component players or be the partners with the larger OEMs that we have in India? Now, that's where again the data will play a very significant role. That's where technologies like a blockchain technology will play a significant role as to how the exchange of information, the distribution of information in a secured and a transparent manner can happen between the OEMs and the SMEs, or maybe between the component manufacturer, the tier 1 manufacturers, or tier 2 manufacturers and the SMEs. From a sectoral standpoint, and I won't spend much of a time on this slide because this is more futuristic as to how we believe the sector is going to progress on a go forward basis. If we leave apart the last 18 months, if we really look at the performance of the sector, particularly focusing on the exports from India for the automobile sector, I think we had the highest exports over the last 7 years in the first half of 21-22, wherein the exports exceeded $23.6 billion. And this is where the competitiveness of the Indian automotive industry comes into consideration. And this is where we need to get future ready if we have to be becoming an alternative, or we have to really adopt something like a China plus one strategy by the global manufacturer, by the global OEMs. And I think if we look at the major regions also that we are currently catering, which is North America, European Union, or the Eastern European markets, the perception of the Indian auto component players has significantly undergone a change over the last 18 months. What used to be a perception by these larger or the global players as to their Indian component manufacturers are not future ready, or they are not, they take time to kind of turn around or supply the components. I think that has significantly changed over the last 18 months, because we were the ones who were the most agile suppliers in the times of distress over the last 18 months to these global buyers. And this all had been only possible because of the investments which have come into the sector, the kind of skill sets, competencies which exist in the sector. And to relate it to the theme that we are discussing, I think it all boils down to the data which is getting generated at each and every level by the manufacturing activities which are being performed in the sector. Just like any other sector, I think we also have our strengths. We also have some limitations, some opportunities, many opportunities rather, I would say, and many threats. So I won't read the slide in the interest of time, but yes, we all know what strengths really we have. It's an emerging market for us. We have the complete support from the government, be it the state level governments or the central government. The different policies which are getting announced. There are fine prints which are now coming out. Recently, the list got announced for the components which are eligible under the PLI scheme. So I think we are moving in the right direction as far as the government or the policy support is needed. In terms of opportunities, yes, certainly we can be an export preferred hub for the global buyers. We intend to move into the new markets. We certainly are complying with the global regulatory norms, etc. But yes, there are certain limitations, threats which are impacting the industry in a very large manner. I think with this background about automation, what we have seen or what we typically call is that intelligent automation, and now talking a bit more in the about the automotive industry. Let me just move on to a few case studies as to how we have seen different technologies being deployed or being used by the OEMs as well as by the entire ecosystem. I would like to talk about something like a digital vehicle passport. Now, what it typically means is that when we have a, a set of information which is residing lot with the OEMs, let's say when you're driving your vehicle, the sensor captures a lot of information about you and your driving behavior. Now, that's one set of information which is, let's say, residing with the OEMs. When you take your vehicle out for servicing and you get your vehicle serviced, there is again a lot of set of information which is available with the OEMs with respect to the performance of the vehicle, which is also, I would say, related to a larger extent with your driving behavior. When you take an insurance, again, there is a fixed insurance. Very soon we may see a variable insurance also coming in. But the point is that can there be a system? Can there be a platform wherein this information is available at a single point of contact, I mean, at a single node, and which then can be used by the different intermediaries for different purposes. So let's say if I am having a vehicle which I've been running for the last 2 to 3 years, based on my driving pattern, based on my servicing which I undertake for my vehicle, can the insurance company use that information to customize an insurance plan, a vehicle insurance plan for me, which could be different from a person who has been driving very rashly, something or has been meeting with more number of accidents as compared to another person. Now, that cannot happen if this set of information is residing with the different intermediaries or with the different subsets of the ecosystem that we just saw, both at the upstream and at the downstream level. But yes, if a technology like a blockchain technology can be used, which is more like a distributed technology, which ensures distribution of the same set of information without any changes being made to that set of information, is something which would be very useful for the industry to consider. And there are OEMs, and there are I would say a lot of OEMs, insurance companies, bankers who have already started creating some kind of a platform which can be used by the people to a very large extent. If you talk about the benefits, I think for example, let's say if there is a company which is into the used car business, and they any which ways have multiple checkpoints which get performed on a vehicle before it is sold, but the accuracy rate can further go up, or the price determination based on certain algorithms which are currently being used can be further modified or can be further enhanced by use of this information which can be centrally available. The claim processing can also undergo a change. Usage-based insurance is something which I talked about. Personalized policy is something which can then be offered to the customers based upon the usage. That's one significant usage of blockchain as a technology which we foresee is going to come in the future as far as the automotive industry is concerned. And it is not only for the OEMs to really be a part of it. Certainly, the dealer principals are going to play a very significant role in this ecosystem. The after-sales service providers are also going to play a very significant role in the system. The customers, any which ways, will stand to get benefited, subject to the data privacy norms, etc., which is not currently the topic of consideration. So that's one use which typically we foresee. When we talk about automation, digital transformation is something what can be played by use of blockchain technology. The other aspect which I thought to talk about was a typical scenario around the price settlement, which is a very common issue or a common problem statement with most of, I would say, the component manufacturers, OEMs to a certain extent, but a larger issue with, I would say, with the tier 2 and the tier 3 manufacturers. And why this? Because the way the contractual arrangements are currently signed between the OEMs and the component manufacturers, there may be or there may not be a clause with respect to the pass-through of the price increase for the raw materials or maybe for any other bought-out parts, etc. Historically, we have seen that the revenue loss can certainly between 4 to 5% if this kind of a price settlement or indexation is not taken into consideration in a timely manner by the component players. And based on our experience of interacting with many component players, we have seen the kind of challenges what they have been facing, the kind of documentation what they need to maintain, the kind of interaction their teams have to make with the OEMs, the kind of time which is spent in terms of reconciling with respect to at what point of time the price actually underwent a change, what was the quantity which was supplied, what is the differential quantity on which this indexation needs to take place. There is I've seen companies which are large enough and they've created a dedicated team who are only and only doing this as an activity. If you look at typically from a sequencing standpoint, there are different activities which can then be broken down into what is something which is a very routine or a mundane activity. Can there be an automation which can be brought in? The answer is yes, which brings a lot of accuracy, which brings a lot of quicker turnaround time, etc. And I'm talking about this scenario wherein you have, let's say, three different scenarios. The scenario A, which is typically when the OEMs have actually negotiated the raw material pricing for you, or a scenario wherein the OEM have actually only approved the vendors from whom the component manufacturers need to buy the raw material, or it could be something that which is the component manufacturer is determining to buy from the suppliers. Now, this is a challenge across all the three categories or all the three scenarios, be it with respect to the timing differences, be it with respect to the negotiation which the OEMs enjoy with the manufacturers, the change in the prices, the impact, etc., which needs to be computed. Now, can there be a solution around it? The answer is very yes. The answer is simple, that yes, the RPS can simply be deployed, and we have seen how effectively they have been deployed to really look at and read certain certain fields from a purchase order, and to really identify as to what is the differential quantity on which the price indexation needs to be applied. The whole amount of data extraction, the whole amount of data validation, the whole activity of even creating the accounting entries can be something which can be automated. And we have seen it, and we have successfully seen it and implemented for our clients as to how this entire process can be automated by use of RPS technology. What it has resulted into, a lot of savings and with respect to the time or the turnaround time, a lot of bandwidth which typically used to get consumed by these companies with respect to the people actually manually pulling out the purchase order details, applying the differential, applying the quantity, multiplying it with the rate differential, etc., is all sorted. There is a reduced error rate. What used to be a very significant error rate, as an auditor, I can talk about it, used to be very significant, has been reduced to almost negligible, almost zero. So I think those are the tangible benefits which we as auditors can also bring in to our clients, to our companies. I'm not saying that, yes, we need to be an expert in terms of understanding how the RPS work, but conceptually, if we think through, if we were to really look into as to where all and which all processes can be automated, and there could be a resultant which is much more meaningful, but much more um, you know which is coming on a timely manner for our clients and for our companies, is something what we need to be keeping our eyes and ears open for. So this is the other example that I thought to kind of talk about. The first one was use of blockchain. The second is use of RPAs. I think the other one is pretty simple, as to how analytics, a simple analytics, whether we call it use of Excel, use of IDEA, or any other application. There are many proprietary tools also which are available, which typically can perform a simple variance analysis between what was my standard consumption, what had to happen as per the bill of material, and what is the actual consumption which has happened. I have seen in my experience over the last 15 years that as auditors, we find it very interesting to really come out with some kind of a variance analysis. But trust me, when it comes to really looking at the production bombs or even the non-production bombs, it's not an easy task. We need to be understanding the entire process, and particularly from an automotive industry standpoint, we need to be understanding the NPD as a process, which is a new product development. What are the different stages before the product is actually out to the customer, or before even a go or a no-go decision is made by the company. We need to be understanding how the engineering change notes typically take place. What is the role that the R&D as a function plays? What is the role that the core production planning actually takes role which is being played? And how these different functionalities are then mapped to the ERP which is being used, which could be any of the SAPs or the Oracles of the world. So as auditors, we typically get into these kind of reconciliation wherein we would we would be excited enough to really talk about what was standard, what is the actual. But I have experienced that many a times, and I would have also committed a similar mistake, is that we come out with something which is factually incorrect. Why? Because we have not understood the entire BOM configuration correctly. We may come out with some factual inaccuracies which may which may disappoint not only the auditee but also the internal audit teams. So I think the better way to look at is as to how we can use some sophisticated analytics tools like IDEA, which already have some predefined scripts and which can then be modified to the environment in which we are operating. And we have used it. I mean, at GT, we have a proprietary tool that we use for performing these kind of analytics and to come out with these kind of variations. Yes, it takes time to customize it because all the ERPs that the clients use are different. The configuration settings are different. The terminologies which are being used are different. But if deployed effectively, if used appropriately, I think it can give wonderful results for any organization. And this is, just a snapshot of how typically, when it comes to presenting the findings to our clients, when it comes to presenting the findings to the management as to what really went wrong or what could have been prevented, is something what it looks like. So I think that's where the analytics typically plays a significant role, both in the life of an auditor as well as for the businesses. We have increasingly seen as to how the businesses, the core business teams, have also started approaching the internal audit teams of our clients, or I would say even our clients, because they see some kind of a value being coming from these kind of analytics. They see some kind of a benefit coming from when we look at integrating, or not integrating, when we look at um, dissecting the information from different angles, as by wearing the hat of an auditor. And that's where the integration, I would say, between what the auditors do and what the business performance do would also becomes very, very important in an organization. So that's something which I thought to really talk about more from a point of view of intelligent automation, as to how technology like a blockchain can be used to create a single source of trust for different set of information which exist in the industry. And any which ways, the technology is industry agnostic. I'm not saying that it can only be used for the automotive industry. It can be used for any of the industry. RPAs is something which is very well used, be it the attended RPAs or the unattended RPAs that we are talking about. We have seen RPAs getting used in a lot of finance functions, because I think that's the first stage where the RPAs typically get deployed. Human resource as a function, IoT enabled production technologies, be it SCADA or be it any other tools which are very effectively working on the shop floors for producing results which are not, which does not involve any kind of a human intervention. So I think what it means is that how we as an organization and even as auditors, as a, as part of the profession, can collaborate with the different businesses, can actually get into some kind of innovative mindset, and start contributing to the business value addition by use of analytics, by use of technology. What is that? The signals of change can we give to our businesses by learning and unlearning on a regular basis? How can we create some kind of a digital culture for our people, for our organization? What is that level of adaptability? And more importantly, from an auditor standpoint, the adaptability becomes so very important because when we work for our companies as the internal audit function, the business might be looking at expanding into geographically or into unrelated businesses. And that's where the adaptability comes and plays a very, very significant role for us as internal auditors. And last but not the least is that critical thinking, which all of us need to be wearing that hat of a critical thinker as an auditor. So this is what I had to really talk about, for the given time to me, and I thought, really picking up something from what we are seeing on a day-to-day basis, picking up something what we see is going to be more futuristic, how it's going to shape the industry, is thought what I should include in my presentation. So back to you, Deepji. This is largely what I had to cover.
Thank you very much, Saket. I think it was wonderful. What is coming out of this presentation is years and years of experience that you have, the competence that you have in this area of automotive practice, because the examples which you gave in terms of, the material cost, the variances, the settlement of debit notes, credit notes, post the, vehicles being manufactured, and, the standard versus actual consumption norms, the most critical aspects of any automobile business, because I think most of it is bought outs. So they have to deal with number of ancillary units, and most of the ancillary units, most of the units which supply the components are all SME sector, and they have to match up, as you rightly said, the quality standards. And in terms of the major automotive manufacturer, they have to match up to that standard, the same standard in terms of supply chain, in terms of documentation, in terms of use of technology, so that they can talk to each other and they can really play well as an orchestra. So, I think very important. And automobile industry in India today is poised as number one manufacturing industry in the private sector, where it is doing a great service to the nation, because it's not only number one employment for the country, but it is also gearing up in terms of exports, major export benefits for the country per se. So I think automobiles sector has been recognized as a number one sector, rising sector in the manufacturing space for India. As in the services, IT has been recognized as sort of a rising sun for India. It's automotive is where manufacturing is recognized as number one for the country. Now we have Saket with us. So if any of you have questions, we can talk about it. But as Saket rightly pointed out, he laid out the business criteria, the business case on why analytics needs to be used by business and by auditors. Because naturally, when business does all this in terms of material consumption, matching SMEs to the components, debit notes, credit notes, so many of invoices coming in terms of PDF files, or whatever is coming in. So how to decipher all that? And auditors also need to gear up in terms of latching onto it and using analytics to decipher or find out from that information or what can be set right, and working with business accordingly. Because businesses are already working with high-tech tools now. So auditors are also gearing up to work with those tools and ensure that the SMEs are also adopting the same tools, so that they talk to the manufacturer. So I think very good presentation, excellent presentation, because as you are speaking, Saket, there are so many case studies which just kept propping up in my mind. RPA, you said adoption of RPA by so-and-so client, by so-and-so company, and what can be done. So the entire scenario is undergoing a drastic change in terms of accounts, finance, audit in the last 2 years, 3 years.
Yeah.
And that's a drastic change which is happening. I was just talking to a CFO yesterday for a very large company, and he said that he has 400 accountants, and maybe he will be down to 100 accountants in 1 year's time. So, because everything will be automated. The other people would be redeployed to other areas,
Right.
So there is a need for skill development. There is a need for automation everywhere. And
No,
of
that's
course,
a very
rightly said. Sorry.
Yeah, that's a very big need, Deepji sir. Why? Because if you notice, particularly from a MSME standpoint, almost as I said, 1/3 of the companies are in the automotive sector, and they are actually the backbone of our industry. We rely a lot on these tier three and these job workers who are SMEs by nature. And if you look at the entire value chain, if any one of them or two of them were to collapse, it certainly impacts it impacts the component, the tier one manufacturers, it impacts the OEMs to a very large extent. So from a industry de-risking standpoint, it is so very important that the larger players come forward and they help these SMEs and these small and medium sized companies to up their skill sets, to up their capabilities. And we have seen it happening. We have seen it happening. I think that's an outcome as to why we could navigate through this last 18 months. I mean, the sector could navigate through the last 18 months because a lot of tier one manufacturers came forward in terms of assisting these smaller companies who were the job workers, who were SMEs, etc. Not only from a competency standpoint, but also from a scalability standpoint. And it's like it's as simple as if I want to run, I can't run if my team is struggling to walk. So if we all have to reach a particular goalpost, we all need to be running, and for that to happen, we'll have to hold hands of each other.
Saket, one other thing, the slide which you have currently on, the building skills for the future. This is not only relevant to the automotive sector, but if you read the questions, I think every internal auditor should be asking these questions. How easy is promoting, fostering ideas or projects integrated with your current ways of working? What portion of your work involves the opportunity to experiment and innovate, and so on? So I think all these questions need to be asked by internal auditor today to see whether the internal auditor is really at the top of his game and is in a position to deliver to the client, and that would be value addition.
Absolutely.
So if there are no questions, Saket, I would request you, if you can just give your email ID. Our participants today can then reach out to you, and those who look at the YouTube video, from tomorrow onwards, they can also reach out to you. All of you are welcome to write to us. We'll reach out to Saket and we'll interact, or we'll share any thoughts or whatever queries you have, we'll answer that. So Saket, can you just give your email ID, please, so that
Sure.
Or you can put it in the chat box.
I'll do that. Sure.
There is no question on YouTube live, no problem. So you can just type out your email ID.
Or maybe I'll send it to you separately, the email ID.
Sure. If you can send me the email ID, I'll send it out to the participants.
Sure.
So a very big thank you to Saket for this wonderful presentation, because I thoroughly enjoyed it. So as you see the presentation, you go on thinking about what you can do with your clients, what further you can go out and do tomorrow, because Peter Drucker said, what are you going to do on coming Monday? So after every workshop, you need to think, what are you going to do next? Just listening to a presentation is no good. You have to have some action plan on what are the learnings from there, and how do you apply it to your current environment. I think that's very important. So I was thinking about what are the learnings from today's presentation for me. So great presentation. I learned a lot. I have jotted down few action points for myself. A very big thank you to all the participants also. And next week on Wednesday, Analytics Wednesday, we have Jefferson Sorensen from Canada live. He's the industry strategist for Caseware Idea, and since this is a season of an IA and everybody's talking about fraud, so he's going to talk about fraud and fraud detection, a data analytics approach, practical case studies. So he'll share practical case studies on that in the area of fraud detection, a data analytics approach. So I look forward to having all of you on the next Wednesday session at 7 p.m. Thank you very much, Saket, and thank you a lot to all the participants.
Thank you, and thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you. And I think Saket has typed his email ID, saket.mehra@in.gt.com for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. See you. Thank you.